Veda Matra Pramudaha Kilaham. Kali Bol Rama Krishna Kali Bol.
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 Kali Bol Rama Krishna Kali Bol Rama Krishna Kali Bol Rama Krishna Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Rama Krishna Kali Bol Rama Krishna Kali Bol Rama Krishna Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Mahadevi Kali Bol Mahamaya Kali Bol Mahashakti Kali Bol. Om Sarva Mangala Mangalaye Shive Sarvata Shadake Sharnyatrambike Gauri Narayani Namostute Shristi Stiti Vinashanam Shakti Bhuti Sanatani Gunashrai Gune Mayi Narayani Namostute Sharanagata Dinarta Paritrana Parayane Sarva Sharti Hari Devi Narayani Namostute Jaya Narayani Namostute, Jaya Narayani Namostute, Jaya Narayani Namostute. To that one who is the most auspicious of the most auspicious ones, who is the foundational energy, primordial Shakti of Lord Shiva, to that one we pay our eternal obeisances. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Te Dhyan Yoga Nugata Pasyan Devatma Shaktim Swagunayar Nagudam Yaha Karanani Nikilani Tani Kalatma Yuktanya Adidishtati Ekaha. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Practicing the yoga of meditation, the ancient seers of India perceived the divine Shakti existing everywhere and in everything, who, though veiled by her own modes of nature, was nevertheless one and indivisible. And who have been obscured to their vision previously due to the limitation of their own intellects. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavo Vahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvesho Vahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. We meet here at SRV Hawaii on Sunday afternoon to take up a course of 7 classes on a subject called Shakta-Advaita-Vada. Vada means path. Shakta is the divine energy, which we were just chanting about, which is in everything, perceived by those beings who are in deepest meditation as the divine mother of the universe, or the primordial goddess, or the mother of the word, who has hundreds and thousands of names, and who also appears as the great matrix and divine Shakti of divine reality. And Advaita means non-dualism, or the path of that we were studying in a recent series of classes under the mantle of Gaudapada's great mind. which we called non-touch yoga. That was the series we just finished, and that's all been recorded, as is the case with this series of class. Welcome to our live streaming audience and to all of you here as we plunge into this great series. Shakta-Advaita-Vada, rather an obscure term as far as the Westerners are concerned, but when our founder Lex Hickson came across it in a list of some 40 or 45 different Vadas or paths that were there in the scriptures of India, he was very inspired by it because it really puts together the elements of what we know of as the Ramakrishna order of India, and really other orders too that both follow the non-dual path of Advaita and also have a special place in their heart for the Divine Mother of the universe. That is, feminine reality, God as Mother. And of course we know our own great inspiration here at SRV is Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who worshipped Mother Kali in the Kali temple in Calcutta in the 1800s, and who brought the mother out of hiding, as it were, from behind her modest veil, and spread her knowledge of her and her wisdom to some 5 million people now who follow him in the world today in a very short century, a little more than a century. So we have some very profound minds and thinkers out there who are probably transcendent of stages of practice and transcendent of practices, and also transcendent of rituals and forms, who nevertheless look back and hearken to the foundation of all form, which is this Shakti power. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Brahman, the non-dual formless reality, and Shakti, that Divine Mother Shakti power of the universe that imbues all forms with their ability to move and think. They're one and the same, like fire in its heat, like water in its wetness, or like a snake in its wriggling motion. And he used to say that no matter how illumined or enlightened a person might get, they couldn't even raise their finger without that Shakti power present in them. So he would point to his own wife and divine consort, who was my teacher's teacher, Sri Sharda Devi, and say, without her, I can't even lift my finger. So he was acknowledging with every breath this divine Shakti, and in fact, the prana which we use to breathe is also supplied by her, and the thoughts that we think, the animating power in everything is Shakti. So that's a very important word in Sanskrit, one of those words that, along with karma and guru and avatar now, other words in Sanskrit have made it into the English language, and that we need to take deeper and deeper looks at, so that we don't just stay on the surface of such profound words, or we don't end up saying that what's in a word, as if something of mere note is there. Actually, something very profound is there in the matra. Matra is a word that means mother. It also means particle. So when we look at intelligence, we're beginning to look at a realm of particles that science does not know about yet, and that theology is overlooked, and we ourselves probably overlooking it in our rush for the accumulation of materials and objects, our preoccupation with senses and their relationships with matter and with the 5 elements. All of these things made of particles which are subtle enough, no doubt, that can't be detected by the outward going senses, except their effects can be detected, not their causes. But this much more refined power called Shakti is actually there at the foundation of all the movements of our breathing process, there in the power to digest our food, there in the healing power in the food, and there in the divine power of thinking power, thought power of all the great minds that have sought her out in deepest meditation, in beautiful songs in India, which I could probably sing, but just in short, meaning that even yogis meditate upon her in a dark mountain cave, shut out all the sensory perceptions so that they can get a glimpse of her brilliance. When they see her, they want to see a brilliance that is far beyond the brilliance of a mere sun in the sky, or even a billion suns in the physical loka. They want to have the conditions just right, as dark and profound as they can be, so that this brilliance of Divine Mother intelligence will show up that much more readily and that much more amazingly in their own consciousness. Because actually, when we're talking about Divine Mother of the Universe, which this chart here on my right has been crafted to use for this period, we're talking about pure consciousness. We are talking about Advaita. She tends to stay in a non-dual state. That's why we can't see her and why the world doesn't know her. And only once in a while, one of her forms makes it into the collective human mind or the individual vision in meditation, because she is so behind the scenes just naturally. So, Lajapata vritti nityam sharda jnana daike papebhyo na sadaraksha kripamai namostute means, O Mother in modest veil, killer of misery and souls resigned, by saints and sages worshipped, O Mother kind, yet nobody sees her. Very few know about her. So when you have a wonderful title like Shakta-Advaita-Vada, although it might sound a bit esoteric to our Western ears, and the Sanskrit rendering and so forth, the path of Divine Mother, the non-dual path of Divine Mother, is what we're talking about. And we've just finished, or not quite finished actually, because tomorrow is Jagadatri Puja, a whole series of holy days based on worship of the Divine Mother in India. And that started out with Navaratri, 9 days and 9 nights of worship of Divine Mother in October. And that's where they worship, they create the goddess out of the elements of the earth and dress her and feed her for 9 days, 9 nights, and worship her and so forth, and then immerse her back into the holy river. So it's this wonderful worship that goes on in India, and in some parts of India she's called Durga, in other parts she's called Ambaji, in other parts she's called Kali. So depending on where you go in India, you'll find them all worshipping the Divine Mother, and in each of the provinces by a different name, sometimes even a different name, even amongst the colonies of a province. So this Divine Mother is widespread, and that Navaratri, 9 days and 9 nights of worship of her, was what we were doing on the mainland this past month at the Portland and San Francisco SRV chapters, when we were giving our 3-4 hour long Durga Puja worships with 10 articles and so forth to the Divine Mother. And that is followed again by Lakshmi Puja and by Kali Puja, then in November, and now tomorrow, in fact, is Jagadatri Puja. Jagadatri means world, Jagat, Datri, holder. So it means she who holds all the worlds. How does she hold them? She holds them in her consciousness, and when they spill out, they're made of intelligence, and then when they dissolve back into her, consciousness returns to consciousness. And so that's one of the more wonderful of all cycles, if you're talking about cycles of projection, sustenance, and withdrawal, which they do a lot of talking about in India, in every philosophy that has come out of India, which are quite a few. You're talking about this most amazing cycle of starting in Brahman, the non-dual reality, consciously coming out of Brahman into the Leela, the divine play, and then sporting a while in that form that you chose, that you created for yourself, and then returning to non-dual reality in Brahman. That's all facilitated by Divine Mother Shakti. Why can't Brahman facilitate it? No, Brahman is static. Brahman is all-pervasive. Brahman is unmoving. Brahman is pure conscious awareness, no mind, no thought, no energy, no power of its own. It's just absolute reality, that's all. So it needs its wriggling power. You see, the snake is sometimes stationary and sometimes it wriggles. So it needs its wriggling power, its dynamic power to facilitate and to pull off this whole plethora of worlds, lokas, realms. That's why we would chant, say, Sham no mitraha, Sham no varunaha, Sham no bhavat varyama, Sham no indra brihaspati, Sham no vishnu rakramaha, Namo brahmane. This is like an ancient peace chant which says salutations to mankind, which includes animals and insects and plants, by the way, physical world, and then salutations to the ancestors, and salutations to the celestials, and then salutations to the gods and goddesses, the deities, and then salutations to the great rishis, the seers and saints and sages, and finally salutations to Vishnu, to God with form, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And at the end of it all, salutations to the formless Brahman. So in this very ancient chant, you have this 5, 6, 7 tiered, you see, salutations to all the levels of existence, all which have spilled out of absolute awareness due to the dynamic power of Mahashakti, Mahamaya, and nobody ever sees her. It's sort of like watching your breath. One of the first things you do in any Buddhist and sometimes Hatha Yoga and so forth, they want you to watch your breath because you're becoming aware of something that you're not usually aware of. And that should clue you into a force that's pumping your lungs. It's not the lungs themselves that are doing it by themselves, and it's some power. Man does not live by bread alone. It's some other power that's causing the lungs to move. And in fact, it has 5 forms called prana. And then you trace prana further from its 5 forms back into to the Shakti power that's animating all of that. See, so there's a way of connecting the dots inward into your own consciousness until you come upon her, that the mother of all beings. She has given you birth. She has given you the ability to play and sport and the ability to dissolve everything that you play with. That's the marvelous human being. Now, what's the marvelous human being going to do with all of this power that's been granted? Is it going to cause mischief, suffering for others? Or is it going to do good things? Or is it going to find its way back to reality the very minute it can? Like Vivekananda said, the minute we're born, we're all rushing towards death. So why were we born? You're talking about projection, that's different. But if you're talking about actually taking a birth and believing in the birth process and believing in death, then you fall into this very unfortunate predicament. The 5th and lowest of all hells, abhinivesha it's called in Sanskrit, where you begin to believe that death is real and that birth is real. Never was such things are fantastic. They're not real, because the soul cannot be born and it cannot die. One of the earliest teachings you learn from her when you begin to study the scriptures. She has her own scriptures too. Chandi is one of them, Devi Mahatmyam, Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, to name a few of the major ones. So these are to be looked into because she will then guide you through all the yogas. She'll be your ideal, your Ishvari. So they say Ishvara and Ishvari are 2 more words that are very powerful in Sanskrit. The highest rendering of God in form that the human mind can contemplate, that can comprehend, Vivekananda said. So, in this very profound period of time, October, November, which is a season of its own in India, they have six seasons usually, depending on which system you look at, instead of 4. So this particular season of October, November is very much given to the Divine Mother worship. So to honor that, I created this chart, and it was for the retreat we gave on the Columbia River Gorge about several weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, and wanted to create a map of her visage, her countenance, and see if we could pepper it with as many different things that are in the philosophy, in the various philosophies of India, and then use it as a teaching guide, not only for that retreat, but for these series of classes, and for those people who are to come who might want to take up the banner, like SRV has done, in the West and begin to spread these teachings, which is a very noble thing to do, very needed to spread the Dharma. So this particular chart then, over the series of the next 7 Sundays, we will try and complete and look at. I have other charts that, of course, attach to it, and you can see there that, and the live streaming audience is actually seeing the full version of it right now, I think, but you're only seeing the 7/8 version of it. You'll see the full version next week when I can get it printed, but there are a few entries missing on this one, but it won't matter for this week's teachings. Basically, you can see that she's surrounded by all of these various akutrama that are all indicative of something very deep and spiritual, something that can be contemplated, as if she's saying that you have no excuse not to sit and meditate upon her and everything that she signifies, and there's no reason to become bored by it or lose interest or, on the other hand, become too overwhelmed, because you can pick them and choose them one at a time and go into them. And that's really the idea of swadhyaya, or study of scripture, and study, all kinds of study in India, is that you're not looking just for the obvious meaning or for the intellectual meaning like we do in the West, but you're looking for the subtle meanings behind, the third level of meaning behind these things. And a word opens up like that. For instance, an object opens up like that. There's the apparent tree called Maya tree, and then there's the shifting particle tree, and then there's the Buddha nature tree, or the Atman tree we would call it in Vedanta. So there's 3 levels to everything, and most beings are satisfied with the first, and some beings penetrate to the second, but very, very few ever even imagine that there's a third level. That's where the reality lies. That's why we're so bereft of illumined souls in the world today, and especially in the West. It's because we're not looking beyond the appearance of things and into what a thing consists of. And then when you find out what it consists of, you find out that that's the effect of another cause, and you look towards the ultimate cause. Like the sound of a bell, as the tone of the bell in it at all times, and emerges from there and returns to there. So everything is showing that kind of cycle, and if a person becomes aware of those kinds of cycles, then they become realized, they become an illumined soul. And they find no dearth then of things to contemplate inside of themselves. All of the mother is actually inside of you. This is just a representation on paper, and with lots of deep teachings to it that are meant to guide you into a meditation on her, and hopefully never losing track of that divine goddess, that supreme Shakti, the primordial goddess. So you can see here that I have begun the chart with a chant out of the Devi Bhagavatam. She says herself, when everything melts away, it is then that pralaya comes. Pralaya is another interesting Sanskrit word. It just simply means the return of everything back to its formless state. And there are several pralayas that happen at the end of yugas, and then there's a grand Mahapralaya that happens at the end of a series of yugas. So this far outstrips the 4,320,000,000 year evolutionary theory of Big Bang and so forth, because it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and the end like the scientific theory does. The cycles are constant. That's the one difference between science's idea of beginnings, middles, and ends, and the idea of cycles in India that roll on forever. There's no beginning, middle, and end to anything. It's called non-origination in India, and it's one of the things we study when we look into Advaita, in the Shakta-Advaita heading. The Advaita part of it is that one of the things we're acknowledging when we say that word, and when we take interest in the philosophy of Advaita, is the non-origination of all things. All things means you, nature, Brahman, and even its Maya. That is, those things that are constantly changing. all have no beginning, middle, and end. The only thing you could say maybe about Maya is that it does have an end in enlightenment. That is, all ignorance goes away, and then you get a clear vision. If thine eye be single, you shall know the truth. All of a sudden you get the clear vision of her reality, which is underlying everything. And at that point, then when ignorance has died, then Maya will die with it. But it'll come dancing back, just like green scum on a pool. Sri Ramakrishna said, you separate it with your hands, see yourself for a few seconds, and then that green scum just comes dancing back. So it's covering power. It's called Avarana Shakti and Vikshepa Shakti. So that's actually one teaching that's in the fabric of this chart is called the three gunas. And basically what you mean by the three gunas is the power of form to cover formless reality, and the power of form to distort, or to apparently distort, formless reality, and the power of formlessness, the power of form to reveal formlessness too. So there's three levels to her, that mode of her power called gunas: covering, distorting, and revealing. Now the seer wants to get a hold of the revelatory power, of course, and not get caught in covering power. That's called tamas, or depression, or darkness, or not get caught in restlessness, frenetic activity, spinning your wheels and going nowhere. That's called rajas. But wants to go to the sattvic level of things, balance out, stay balanced for as long as possible, keep the mind balanced too, and its thought process, so that it can get a glimpse of divine reality inside of itself, inside of its own heart. That's why we chanted about the Devatma Shakti, existing everything and everyone and in everything. So to see through the apparent, the covering power, and also to escape the distorting power of things, which is very confusing, especially in terms of karma and its repercussions, then a person gets a hold of the Prakasha Shakti, it's called. Prakasha. That word akasha is a very important word in Sanskrit again. It means space, but it means a kind of space that is infilled with a particle that's not atomic. It's really atmic. It's not atomic, atmic. So basically it's leaning towards intelligence. Intelligence is the one thing that an atheist or an agnostic can't overlook, you see. The intelligence that inhabits the mind of a realized soul or a great thinker is not a matter of evolution. It's a matter of revelation. So that revelatory power that is there is immediate, and it defies beginnings, middles, and ends. It's what they really point to when they talk about the eternal moment. So that eternal moment occupies an eternal space. And if time is let loose, then it begins to degrade and slow down. See, and then pretty soon, and space too, let loose, it begins to degrade and slow down until you have solid objects. But it all started back at a very primal vibration. In the beginning was the word kind of vibration. And there it was vibrating so refined and so ecstatically, so in such a revelatory way that it escaped the trammels of everything that happens when time and space and cause and effect, Maya, name, form, time, space, and effect. There's right there, you see, Nama, Rupa, Desha, Kala, Nimitta. Those 5 words equal Maya. So Maya isn't just some flummoxing illusion or son of a barren woman or some strange thing that's occupying your mind or something that you can't get beyond. It's what you're living in. It's name and form in time, passing in time, held in space, and beset by cause and effect in repercussions all the time, in cycles, see, and all governed over by these 3 gunas: slothfulness, restlessness, and balance. And beings are falling in and out of those cycles and those gunas all the time. That's what they call moods. I'm in a bad mood today. I'm very restless, and so forth. they're falling under the auspice of these cycles, going constantly. So, see, I didn't even get one sentence out of my mouth before I had to start to explain. Pralaya is this dissolution of all things that happened at the end of just one of those cycles, called a yuga or a mahayuga. Then she says, at that time, Pralaya, I abide with Brahman, latent in it. So she shows that she's one with Brahman. When the worlds are projected again in a new cycle, I become Shri, Buddhi, Driti, Smriti, Shraddha, Medha, Daya, Laja, Kshuddha, Trishna, Kshama, Akshama, Nidra, Tandra, Jara, Vidya, Avidya, Shakti, Ashakti, etc. In other words, what she's saying here is pretty famous as Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Vishnu Mayati Shabgita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Chaitaneti Abhidiyate Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Samstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Ya Devi Namo Namaha Ya Devi Namo Namaha Ya Devi Namo Namaha Ya Devi Namo Namaha Devi Sarvabhuteshu Driti Rupena Samstita Smriti Rupena Samstita Shraddha Rupena Samstita Daya Rupena Samstita. It goes on like that, on, in a chant that just lasts for hours if you wanted to. Shall I just start singing these teachings to you instead of speaking them? That's basically what they did. And that's why I still adhere to some of the musical expressions of them. Not only just to sweeten the pot of our ears, but also because it conveys more of the bhakti spirit of here. You see, this whole, one side of the chart is more towards prema bhakti, the other side is more toward brahmagyan. Prema bhakti means ecstatic devotion, and brahmagyan means the highest non-dual wisdom. The thine eye be single kind of non-dual wisdom. So the chart is sort of laid out that way, as you can see. I flow through the 35 millions of nadis located in the sacred human heart, or the sacred human form. So that's back to this marvelous human mechanism which is cut in the image. So it's really, you could say cut in his image. Here we're saying cut in her image. You're born out of the mother's womb. And that womb is intelligence, not matter. So to realize yourself as intelligence, then you're going to have to leave matter alone for a little while. Who said that? Swami Vivekananda. In order to prove to yourself that you're not matter, you must leave matter alone. That's not what we're doing, by the way. We're very preoccupied with matter. And even our intelligentsia, our scholastic level of learning and all that is very, very much wrapped up in matter. But spirituality begins when one leaves off of matter and begins to consider things that are at least metaphysical in nature, and then leave the whole physical and the metaphysical behind. You begin to get into beyond occult powers and divining and so forth, and you begin to have these experiences that are closely associated with self-realization, they call it self-realization. So here in this first quote out of the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, that big, huge mother scripture that is a wonderful read, full of her wisdom, we find out that she's speaking cycles, and she's speaking about consciousness that mans cycles, and she's speaking about herself as qualities. Shri means abundance, Buddhi means intelligence, Smriti means memory, Shraddha means faith, Laja means modesty, Trishna means thirst and its satisfaction, that's desire, and so forth. Nidra means sleep. One of Nidra Rupena Samstita is one of those, oh mother, you exist in all forms as sleep, as samadhi. So actually equating deep sleep with samadhi. That's a teaching that's very much in line with the non-dual Advaita of India. You go into Sushupti, it's called deep sleep, then it's a kind of samadhi. You're in a kind of samadhi every night, and that's because you left your form behind. When you were dreaming, you didn't leave your forms behind. You were playing with subtle versions of this. See? When you came back out and played with the solid version, you went back in and played with the subtle version. But when you went into deep sleep, you entered formlessness, and you had no ego. At least not an ego that didn't, an ego that came back. So that's the shortcoming of deep sleep, is that you're not dissolving your ego completely into self-realization, but you're having that experience of formlessness, and you're forgetting what it felt like when you wake up. You just feel real good after getting good deep sleep, and you don't feel that way after dreaming so very, very long, you see. You feel tired. You ran your wheels in Rajas, in the guna of Rajas, didn't you? That's the distorting power. But when you went into deep sleep, you felt sattva. You felt a very deep balance, and you paid obeisance to your own self. See? Salutations to my own self, the Tantras say. The deity of my own self exists within. I pay obeisances there. So with that beautiful chant and what it implies, that she is all these qualities, we have to begin looking at her as that and saluting her as those qualities in us, like compassion, daya, and others. Then we can look at the whole crown of this chart. You see pretty much everything with the pillars that follow up her crown and her arc here of her throne and over to these pillars are what I'd like to try and look at today, because they're the Advaita part of the Advaita, Shakta-Advaita-Vada. That is, as we work our way down into prana, into sacrifice, and into Maya, and into the Trinity, and back down into nature, in both its manifested and unmanifested forms, we'll begin to show how all qualities, some of which are mentioned here, and more conscious qualities, but all qualities called tattvas, or principles, that are less sentient than intelligence, yet still imbued by intelligence, are all come spilling out of her. And there's where you'll go to the Astika and Nastika. That is basically the traditional orthodox systems of India, like yoga and Vedanta and so forth, and the non-orthodox systems of India, like Buddhism and Jainism. And you'll see that both of these pillars have Advaitic sides to them. Their philosophy is all tied up with the non-dual, with principles like no birth, no death, that's a jati, it's called, and principles of no change, a parinama, no transformation goes on, that transformation is all an illusion. And you should step back and quit buying into it and see it all going on in yourself by your own power. There have been little hints of this going on in the Western mindset for the last several decades. You create your own reality kind of ideas, but they're just brushing the surface of what's really meant in India by the fact that all of this world is a projection of your own doing. See? And when you withdraw that projection back, when you meet Shiva, because everyone likes Brahma, the projector, and everyone likes Vishnu, the sustainer, but when it comes to Shiva, they shy away, you see, because they don't want to dissolve everything back into formlessness. That's why they can't get into samadhi. That's why they can't have ecstasy. When Vivekananda laid down at night, he said, I lay there, and then I feel peace, first thing. Then the peace deepens. Then it deepens so much I begin to have bliss. Then the bliss becomes so intense that I have to stand up and dance around. So I can't sleep. Can't sleep. Yogic insomnia, it's called. So this is a perfected being, a nityasiddha. This is how he lays down to go to sleep and what he feels. What do you feel when you lay down to go to sleep? What do you think about? Where do you go? So we're to think that a soul in its natural realized condition would feel this bliss, from happiness to contentment, from contentment to peace, from peace to bliss. See, and those consciousness would become aware of itself as non-dual in that process. It would end up in a foundation that is just absolutely saturated in peace, saturated with mother consciousness, Shakti power, and with no problems and no ills and no diseases, no fear of birth and death, no desire for birth, no fear of death, probably be a better way of putting it, just completely taken up with what is, the divine reality. So, an example, Astika and Nastika, these two pillars, which we'll look at in a new chart that I formulated. But first, let's look at what's at the crown of her head, Brahman. So, another word for Brahman here is Paramatman. Now, keep this chart in mind as we look at that teaching at the very crown of her head there. See, word Paramatman means the supreme Atman or supreme self. It has 6 complements, they say. First, Svatantra, unbounded freedom, would be the first moniker or the first sign you would want to place on it. See? Unbounded freedom, ever free, never bound, Vivekananda used to say. So that bliss, that peace, that contentment, that happiness, that life which is divine is all founded in freedom, not the other way around. It's not that you're seeking freedom through those stages or gradations. It's that freedom is there first and all these other things come spilling out of it naturally, and that's what you want to experience. Svatantra is one of the greatest words in Sanskrit. Not one of the words that's penetrated into our English language by any means yet, but Vivekananda's favorite. See, of all the words in English, he liked freedom the best. So he chose July 4th to pass away into Mahasamadhi. See. Show us what true freedom is about. That is, true freedom is not something that can be won, or not something that can be gained through practice, not something that comes about through transformations, not something that comes about over time. It is your true nature. You are free at all times. And if you don't know that, then lay down or sit down and find your way to that freedom which is the foundation of everything. You'll see it by those signs: happiness, contentment, peace, the peace that passes all understanding. Om, you'll hear the Om, you'll see the light, Jyoti, whatever it takes, depending on the temperament or the karmas or neutralized karmas of the particular seeker involved, you'll find it through that avenue that you choose. So along with Svatantra, Svatantra is Ananta, infinite power. Ananta, another very non-dual word there, also called Shaktimatvam. Sarvagyatvam is there, perfect omniscience, and Anadi Bodhatvam, integral knowledge. Also Triptihi, eternal contentment, and Nityatvam, perpetual existence. These are the 6 complements of the Paramatman. These would be better understood by using the example of the evergreen, you see. Then somebody starts hanging ornaments on it. So these aren't ornaments on it, these are the green of the tree. This is what the Atman, the Supreme Self, is made out of. That's its nature. You can't add anything onto it or take anything away from it. You can't assign anything to it or decry it. You see, these are the things that it is made of. It's the green of the tree. They have what's called the 10 Immutables to the Paramatman. Jnanam, absolute knowledge. Vairagyam, mature dispassion. Aishvarya, supreme lordship. Tapas, inconceivable power. That is, tapas means austerity. Able to subsist on anything and really lives by the power of nothingness, of austerity, of giving up, of renouncing, of detaching. They say the yogi gets many, many more times joy out of giving up than accumulating. So if you feel like giving away is a better thing than accumulating, you're probably on the road to reality right there. You're getting much more joy out of doing tapas in the body. Satyam, non-dual truth. Kshama, that was one of the words up here. She said, I am kshama, I am akshama. So she's natural graciousness. She's also a terror, especially to those who oppose her. Just read about some of her exploits in the battlefield, and you won't feel so bad for Arjuna anymore. Some of the demons that Divine Mother dispatches are much worse than the Kaurava clan that Arjuna has to face on the battlefield. So that's why she says, kshama, akshama. I am kshama, I am akshama. She's always these pairs of opposites, you see. Sri Ramakrishna actually have a story to explain that. He said, there's the cat, the mother cat, and when it treats its kitten, treats it very gently, and withdraws its claws and covers its fang with its lips when it picks it up. But she doesn't do that for the mouse. So that's the difference between a person who's surrendered to the divine Shakti power, like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa did. And that was his great secret. That's why his life was so blessed. Mother had blessed him completely. And the difference between a soul like that and a soul that is resistant and obstinate and won't learn its lesson. Then the world cat mother will have to come with the fangs out, claws out, and the suffering that goes with that in order to learn the lesson. And then you have abundant creativity. That's a good one for her. Shakti power is continually projecting, and sustaining and withdrawing. She does that through her Trinity. That's why we always sing that song, for instance. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Deva Maheshwara, Gurur Eva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Deva Maheshwaraha. That is, salutations to Brahma, the creator, salutations to Vishnu, the sustainer, salutations to Deva Maheshwara, means Shiva, the dissolver, the destroyer. Salutations to that Trinity. So she gets all her work done through those three lads. She herself tends to remain formless. And they say even when she appears on the battlefield of relativity, she will be announced by the four Vedas. Brahma will sprout up with his four heads, four faces, and each of the faces will start singing the four Vedas. And that always happens before she makes an appearance in form, so very auspicious. Shankara has said, Divine Mother created all the universes out of the four Vedas, created the Vedas out of intelligence. So that's how profoundly they look at their scriptures. So abundant creativity there in Divine Mother. Driti, immutable stability. Like Shiva, this mudra means immutable stability, not going anywhere. It always has a strong foundation and is settled there. And then full dominion, that is the matriarch of all the worlds, oversees them all and sees everything from Brahman down to a blade of grass, as the scriptures say. So this is called the 6 complements and 10 immutables of the Paramatman, the Supreme Self. Now the quote here at the bottom by Sri Ramakrishna says it all. There is one Supreme Essence called Paramatman. It is formless. But seekers of the formless often make this one mistake. They forget that it is also imbued with infinite power. Living beings, the universe, mind, intelligence, love, renunciation, knowledge, these are the manifestations of its power. Therefore I accept not only Brahman, but also Maya, the universe, and its living beings. So Sri Ramakrishna has an eye towards all. We were talking about that at Satsang this morning, live streaming Satsang, how that unique soul has a universal nature that is defying all other ways of looking at things, narrow ways, especially sectarian ways. So in that way, he says here that when he looks at a living being, he sees God. And when he sees its intelligence, he sees the mother. And when he sees the universe manifested in name and form, he sees Brahman in everything. So those are signs of this inconceivable power. This infinite power, which are listed up above there. Anatma Shakti Matavam, and the other immutables and complements of Brahman. So we get a look at divine reality in its non-dual form. Advaita being a collection of the highest of all qualities. That is, you have to assign it some sort of quality because you're going to have to push off from it to get into a formless state. To know what it really is, you're going to have a springboard. You can't leave yourself without a foundation. So that Holy Mother said that nicely. She says, be very careful with your mind, because your mind is very important at this state of your spiritual evolution. You're going to have to take it with you to Brahman. So she knows the mind is the vehicle in which to get into Brahman. The mind has consciousness, intelligence in it, compassion, all these beautiful qualities. So obviously we're not talking about manas here, which is full of imperfections. Manas means the dual mind. We're talking about the mahat, the great mind, and how the refinement of the ego and the refinement of the intelligence and the purification of one's thoughts turns the dual mind into non-dual mind. So in that way you need a springboard. You might say you won't be able to abandon the idea of transformation and get to non-transformation, because you're going to need it as an impetus to work your way into a non-dual state. That's called Advaita. It's very rare. In fact, here it is listed here, Nirvikalpa. It's a very rare facet of Brahman. Now, the other chart on Brahman I wanted to show is here. These levels of subtlety in Brahman, which is following what I just said, basically. That which is the supreme Brahman, the soul of all, the great support for the universe, called Ati Sukshma, subtler than the most subtle, and eternal, that is thyself, and thou art that. So there's how the Upanishads speak to you if you're studying them. This is the Kaivalya Upanishad. Kaivalya is on this list too, on one of the pillars. Kaivalya is penultimate samadhi. It's the divorcing of name and form at the very highest level. All beings will come to a place, and we might as well put it this way, you do come to a place where you give up your dreams tonight, or last night, and you go into deep sleep. And it's a kind of Kaivalya, because you're saying goodbye to name and form, which is usually so dear to you. And now you feel this intense inner pull to go formless, because you know the greatest rest, the greatest peace, and the greatest bliss exists in formlessness. So most people don't feel that draw and that attraction because they're not practicing. You have to practice meditation and cut time down and cut space away. That's Maya, again, time, space, and causality and so forth. So when you practice cutting those away, then that allurement will happen to you, that divine attraction, that supreme restlessness, however they describe it, will begin to dawn on you, and you'll want to experience again and again that taste of non-duality, which is the sweetest of all bliss, the highest of all bliss. Adi Sukshma, the subtlemost of the subtle. And that's your true nature, the Upanishad says. So that's what you're bound to find. You're seeking it for now. When the seeking is crowned with success, then you'll know yourself to be that. And you'll know that you've always been that. Now, these 4 words in Sanskrit are important too. Sakshi, Kutastha, Antaryami, and Pratyagatman. Sakshi means witness. You should be aware that as you get towards a state which is infused with non-duality, Advaita, that you'll become aware of a subtle witness to all things. And that's a good thing. Now you want to get a hold of that. That's detached witness consciousness. It's the opposite of the kind of consciousness that gets attracted to phenomena and begins to get attached to objective phenomena. It's not objectivity at all, it's the eternal subject that you're beginning to mimic when you get into Sakshi. Sakshi Bhutam, the witness of all phenomena. So it's not something that gets attracted and pulled into phenomena. It's something that has the innate intelligence to pull itself out of appearances. People are always getting trapped in appearances and then pulled into matter, into senses, into objects, into relativity. But to get to reality, you take the opposite tact. You begin to develop witness consciousness, Sakshi Bhutam. About Sakshi Bhutam, it is self-luminous and a witness of all beings in phenomena and in relativity. On the other side, it is the presence and absence of knower, knowledge, and knowable. So one of the signs, as abstruse as it is, that they give you about Sakshi Bhutam, about Sakshi the witness, is that that triplicate of knowledge, knowable, and what is known begins to go away. Those 3 have been in your mind. I am the knower of that knowledge, and I am doing the knowing, you see. So when that dynamic begins to disappear, the witness starts to come forward, and the 3 become one. And it's an actual state of consciousness you reach inside of yourself, in which you observe that happening to yourself. You might call it the dynamics of refinement of intelligence, diminution of ego, the rendering dual thoughts non-dual. See, because the mind has 4 compartments: ego, intelligence, mind, and thought. It's called antakarana. And antakarana means 4-fold mind, so that's how they describe mind in India. So all 4 of those have to be taken to task. If 3 of them are refined and 1 isn't, then it's going to be very difficult to get into that very rare state of non-duality. Something will pull you out, sort of like one corner of the bed isn't tucked in, or one hair is sticking out. See, the picture isn't perfect enough for realization to dawn. Now the quote there from the Mundaka Upanishad: as the spider emits and withdraws its web, as herbs sprout from the soil of the earth, as hair grows on the head, without any effort, so from the imperishable being the universe springs forth. And the seers say it springs forth in an eternal moment, that the passage of time is just an illusion. And that, of course, you prove to yourself every night in deep sleep when the world goes away, and then in the morning you bring it back again. So you as an individual are always, you could say one of 2 ways. You're either projecting the universe and waking up to it, or you're having the idea of the universe occur to your mind and entering into it. However way you cut it, it's all a matter of your own doing, because formlessness dawns in 4 ways: deep sleep, death, meditation, and samadhi. Those are the 4 times in which a person can go formless. And you probably shouldn't wait on death for that, because you'll be caught unawares. You should practice going formless. you do it every night in deep sleep, so you don't need to fear it. You don't need to fear it. A lot of people say, I fear going into that non-dual state. I had a chance to do it and I'm afraid I would die. Well, you don't die when you go to sleep. You wake up again. Well, it's really not that much different. You're just giving up your form temporarily. And if you can do that consciously, then you're opening the portholes to higher consciousness. The higher chakras, if you want to put it in the Kundalini way of speaking. Sri Ramakrishna talked quite often in the Kundalini way of speaking. Now, Kutastha means substratum. If there's any description of Brahman available, this is it. I mean, it's something that you can only point at. It's not something that you can show to people. When we get over here to Pramana, I can show you through the philosophy how they prove the existence of Brahman in 6 different ways. In a new chart that you haven't seen, unless you were at the Columbia River Retreat. Kutastha means a substratum. So they want you to know that along with this witness consciousness, that's an important thing because it's alive. It's conscious, it's aware. It's not some sterile mechanism or something, or some formless reality that doesn't have, like a void, that doesn't have any intelligence or consciousness in it. That's what you might assume it to be if you just went on the level of Kutastha alone. But if you put Sakshi together with Kutastha, you find out that this witness is aware of a foundation that's existing, an underlying foundation. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, a dancer needs a stage. So all things that move need this underlying immovable substratum underneath them. And it's one of the proofs of reality in Samkhya Yoga, for instance, that everything that moves needs something immovable to move upon. So that's how they point towards Brahman. It's called inference. If there's smoke on yonder hill, there must be fire. That's an inference. So if there's all this movement, there must be some immovable substratum that's supporting it. And we can't call it the earth because that's spinning hundreds of miles through space, you see. So there must be an underlying substratum for that substratum, and so forth and so on, until you find this ultimate Kutastha. Now, it's residing in all that is unreal, from Lord Brahma down to an ant. Its undifferentiated presence in and as the intelligence of all beings. So if you found Kutastha, you'd be finding Divine Mother of the Universe, as they describe her, as underlying intelligence in all beings. Intelligence that they're not always aware of themselves. In one song in India, it says, "Oh Mother, you don't even know the extent of your own knowledge. So vast is it." You see, she doesn't even know the extent of her own knowledge, because that's how infinite it is. So this is the idea of infinity. Now, Katha Upanishad says, the Atman, hidden in all beings, reveals itself not to all, but is seen only by the seers of the subtle through their refined and pointed intellects. So this is how one sharpens the intellect in order to penetrate through appearances. And that's done philosophically, and it's done religiously, it's done through sadhana, practice. The Antaryami there is the inner ruler immortal seated in the heart, is how one Vedantic teacher that I attended upon defined it. The inner ruler immortal seated in the heart. Very beautiful expression. So this gives us, along with the idea of Sakshi, a witness which is detached, and a witness of some substratum that's holding everything. Remember, tomorrow is Jagadatri Puja, right? Jagadatri, the holder of the worlds. So here's the underlying substratum. I can't think of some grand dame in space with her hands out holding the planets. You see, that's only an artist's rendition, a conception. We're thinking about pure intelligence holding everything, an underlying substratum of consciousness which is formless that's holding everything. And it's a formless that's not bereft of consciousness, or it's not a void kind of formlessness. It's got 6 complements and 10 immutables in it, for instance. So you'd have to look at that and say, this is a divine substratum. This isn't something that you can explain away through nihilism or something. See, it's something that has very profound ramifications for those who consider it. It's interwoven in everything like the thread which runs through a string of jewels. That's Krishna's description of himself, really, because he is the Antaryami. Good example of the Antaryami. He's like the thread that runs through the string of jewels. Now, the quote there is, that individual soul is as subtle as a hairpoint divided and subdivided hundreds of times, yet it is potentially infinite. It has to be known. Beyond gender, whatever body it assumes, it becomes identified with. That's from the Shakta-Advaita-Vada Upanishad, which we've been studying on the mainland for about 3 years now at the Portland and San Francisco ashrams. So, in order to give us some grasp of Brahman's subtlety, we have Sakshi, Kutastha, and Antaryami, words in Sanskrit. We don't have words like that in our language. So we have to look for them in other language. Pratyagatman is there. That is a homogeneous mass of consciousness free of all limiting adjuncts. So this is where you get the idea of an indeterminable mass of pure conscious awareness, timeless and deathless. You quickly run out of words to describe it in English. So, but the beautiful thing about Sanskrit is you can just say Pratyagatman. I know one Swami is named Pratyagatmananda. And I said, what's that again, Swami? And he said, you know what the Pratyagatman is? I'm the bliss of that. There's the bliss of the indeterminable mass of pure conscious awareness. Like our chant says, see, Brahman is an indeterminable mass of pure conscious awareness, indivisible. Therefore, taking what is outside and what is inside, render him into one indivisible reality, and then meditate on that reality. That's the Pratyagatman. You're doing the rendering of something that's already pure and whole, you see. You've fallen into the delusion of outer and inner. So now you take the outer and inner and you fuse them. You meditate on that, realize they were always one. And then you walk away with the realization of that. In bliss. And in freedom. You start taking account of all the merit badges you have in you see. Absolute freedom. Sarva Upanishad puts it this way: like clay in pots, like golden ornaments, like thread in fabric, it is subtle like these. That Brahman is antecedent, pervading consciousness in everything. Very few words to describe perfect description, because it uses metaphor as well, analogy. Clay in pots, thread in carpet. That's the way you have to look for Brahman. One of my favorites is oil and sesame seed. Who would have thunk there was a nutritious oil? How much trouble it took to grow sesame seeds, collect a handful, invent a press, squeeze out a few drops and taste it, analyze it. So much effort just to find out that there's this nutritious oil in sesame seeds. So like that, they say, look for Brahman as the most subtle of the subtlemost in all things. Learn to ferret it out, to squeeze it out like that. Sarva Upanishad, that means, Sarva means everything. Everything is Brahman. The Kaivalya Upanishad again says, that which is the supreme Brahman, the soul of all, the great support for the universe, called Ati Sukshma, the most subtle, that is thyself, and thou art that. That's how we repeated that before. Now, there's one more quote here. That is the substratum, the bliss, the indivisible consciousness in whom the three worlds dissolve. Realizing the Atman abiding in heart, partless, secondless, beyond existence and non-existence, one attains the Paramatman. Paramatman. And beyond existence and non-existence, you see. So all of these connecting points in these charts about Brahman and how Brahman and Shakti are one, like fire and its heat. You say that in many beautiful ways, many beautiful chants. Now that chart we went through in rather a whirl, but that gives you 4 words of very infinite and subtle power to meditate on tonight in your meditation, tomorrow morning. Substratum, katasta. You can use the English if you want. Witness, sakshi, pratyekatman, the supreme mass of consciousness. And antaryami, the inner ruler immortal seated in the heart. All of these things pointing towards this non-dual Brahman, which is there at the very crown of her head. See, in her hair, in her headpiece or crown. Now, those are the 2 charts I selected out of a combination of several, but I wanted to show you one before the break that has a little bit more of a hands-on effect for us. That is, what makes one fit for the Brahman state? There's one of those newest of all pictures they found of Swamiji in someone's attic a few years ago. We're always coming, because he was here in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we're always coming up with some new discoveries about Vivekananda, and we're beginning to realize what happened to us when this great soul visited us, jumped the ocean from India to America and to other points west, and brought these incredible teachings to us very early on in the picture. He came back with the first World's Fair. It was a very interesting time. People like Nikola Tesla were working with electricity, and all sorts of interesting things were happening. And Vivekananda was very interested in us and what we were doing, but he says, technologically you're very advanced, but spiritually you're just mere babies, I can see. So here's some teachings for you. See? And he began to pour on the Dharma. And now, some over a century later, we're beginning to come up with some understanding of what really happened to us. Well, there's this teaching, the 7 levels of higher knowledge in those fitted for the Brahman state. The quote there is by Vivekananda: "The earth moves, causing the illusion of the movement of the sun, but the sun does not move. So, Prakriti or Maya or nature is moving, changing, unfolding veil after veil, turning over leaf after leaf of this grand book called life, while the witnessing soul drinks in knowledge, unmoved, unchanged." So a nice description of the Atman, or the Paramatman, with its inherent knowledge. It was one of those complements, those attributes there, the immutables. And also the idea of it not going anywhere. I used to say, by way of example, if you pick up a book, and begin to turn pages, then that's how the soul reads nature. And the book is inside of itself, and it takes it out, reads, flips over page after page, reads the book of nature, closes it, puts it back inside. So the soul's always doing that. Nature has come out of the soul, not the other way around. Maya has made it look like things come out of nature, but it's really nature has first come out of the soul and then produced things. And that's the important piece that we're missing in our thinking process. The idea of something eternally perfect instead of original sin, or something that's non-transformational instead of going through changes all the time. Something that's transcends evolution, when evolution is going on outside, but inside the soul is the witness, sakshi again, the witness of all those changes. It's really the author of those changes too. Swami Vivekananda used to say, "You are never in Maya. It is Maya that's in you, so get rid of it." Mm-hmm. So he was always taking the active stance and proactive stance to try and return himself and all of us to that original state of knowledge, non-dual wisdom, Advaita. So through metaphors, through analogies, and with great words, he tells us that the soul drinks in knowledge, but it's always unmoved and unchanged. Now, to be fitted for a state of non-dual realization, this is what the scriptures tell us. First, we must have antaha gyan, realization of the inherent knowledge within us. Even in yoga, you have Patanjali saying there's 7 steps, 7 stages of knowledge, and the second one, I think, is all knowledge lies within you. So you have to take a 2% shift here, you see, of your usual thinking process, and you begin to think of all this knowledge that you've been seeking outwardly under the idea that it wasn't yours, or you had to find it, is actually emanating from within you. And the worlds and the objects are that same intelligence, that's mother intelligence. So you turn it back in on itself and you begin to get grander realizations. He says, the object in work is purification of the soul to make it fit for knowledge. So to emphasize the point, he says, action, work won't get you anywhere. It's an endless path, and no good comes of it whatsoever, because the soul is already perfect. How could work help it, see? So what you probably should be thinking more is that if I'm not feeling myself to be realized yet, if I don't know my Atman, if I don't know myself as the supreme being in everything and everywhere, then I'm going to have to look at it more as work as a purifier. He used to say, in this world you can strengthen your muscles, it's like a gymnasium. But then when you're strong, you can leave the gymnasium, you see. So that kind of idea, work has a certain purificatory power, but beyond that it's just a morbid dream. I'm quoting him. Beyond that it's just a morbid dream. People get into rounds of work and they work themselves to death. That's Rajas, by the way. That's that distorting power we were talking about. There's the obscuring power, which just completely covers, nobody knows a thing. And then there's distorting power, which makes something good look bad and something bad look good, and a mixture in between. They're both very flummoxing. But sattva is the balance, prakasha, the revelatory power. So that's this atma gyan, antaha gyan, inner knowledge. The second level of higher knowledge is dukkha samyoga viyogam, the elimination of pain. The Four Noble Truths of Buddha are a good thing to look into for that, because he says suffering is, and then next he says there's a cause for suffering, and then he says there's a way out of suffering, and then he gives you the Eightfold Path. So pretty much saying that you have to admit that this world is not your oyster as you thought it was, that it's full of suffering. Holy Mother said, the suffering of this world has gotten into the very marrow of my bones. See? And she was a perfect soul. So if perfect souls come here and suffer, then how much more are the rest of us going to suffer? So this, as Vivekananda himself said, this world's a dream, though true it seem. The only real is the only real is He, the living. The real me is none but He, and never, never matter changing. Is one of his poems. The real me is none but He, Brahman, and never, never matter changing. So, coming again and again to emphasize that spiritual nature of human beings. He says there, it is glorious to withhold the soul from suffering with the body. So that's at that stage where you find the cause for suffering and you follow the Eightfold Path and you eliminate suffering out of your life. Then you live in a state of subtle bliss. It's called subtle bliss. You see people in it once in a while. They don't brood, they're not depressed, they're not worried. Come what may. So it's not a cavalier, devil-may-care attitude. That's a fool's way of going. This is the attainment of the elimination of suffering. And they say even that suffering, when it does happen, feels good to that yogi. Oh, that's really a good lesson. See? I like that pain. See? That's tapas. They can go out in the forest and fast, and it hurts the stomach, emaciates the body. They say, this is good, I like this. See? I'm proving myself not to be the body. See? Let the body go if it has to. So elimination of pain is actually a yogic reality. It's recommended by yogis. Patanjali, for instance, the father of all yogis, he recommends elimination of pain. And his way is facing it off, not running away. Samadhi sampadanam. Attainment of samadhi is the third level of higher knowledge for those fitted for the Brahman state. He says, remain immersed in samadhi, but come out in order to help others. So the idea of attaining samadhi for him, nirvikalpa and savikalpa, we'll look at that after the break. It's also called asampragyata and sampragyata, seated and unseated samadhis. So the nirvikalpa samadhi, nirvi, extinct, kalpa, time, phases of time, tends to wipe away everything, and the soul does not return to the body in many cases. Or if it doesn't return within 21 days, that's it. It'll leave the body, for instance, forever, and immerse, like a hailstone in an ocean, Shankara says. So if you're talking about that kind of samadhi, you're probably not going to be of much good to others, except as an example. But Savikalpa Samadhi has got about 4 to 8 different levels. And those are wisdom samadhis, bliss samadhis, samadhis of ripe ego. There are different kinds of samadhis that are talked about. We can look at them a little bit in the second half, because this is the Advaita part of this class. We'll get more into the philosophies, which step down a bit later in the series of classes. So he says, remain immersed in samadhi, but develop the ability to come out of samadhi and come back to the world to help others. So you'd be practicing that. You probably don't think, I think I'll go practice sleep now. I'm going to practice going to sleep. See how good I can get at it. That's a good excuse for the lazy person, isn't it? But it's sort of like that. I see, if I practice samadhi by steps, deeper and deeper each time I go in, you see, then I'm going to kind of cut a trail. I'm going to blaze a trail back into my own consciousness. And I'll probably begin finding signs that I've been there before. See? Oh, there's that knife I lost. You see, there's that machete that got lost in the jungle. So you find little signs that you've been in there before, and you're just reblazing the trail. See? And this is what deja vu is all about, and that kind of thing, only that's more on the surface level, is you get these inklings that you've been there before, or that you've done that particular thing before, because you have many, many times. But that one time that you do it in consciousness, that's the time that counts. And the one time you do it in full consciousness will make a strong impression on your divine memory. Smriti Bedu. It's a divine memory back inside of you that usually you don't access. That's also where part of your memories of your past lives are stored. Smriti Bedu. Subtle, actually causal memory would be a better way of saying it. Causal memory. Subtle memory you can sometimes perk that and get something out of it. Causal memory is very, very deep. So if you were to make use of that, samadhi sampadanam, then you'd start to remember other ecstatic experiences you had in other lifetimes. Rare as hen's teeth. Probably count them on one hand. All those experiences I had in my life, which were truly spiritual, very rare. There's always some doubt about most of them. You're looking for the real thing, so you don't take any wooden nickels. Now, samyak darshanam is perfect vision. And that's another of the levels of those fitted for Brahman state. This is an amalgam of what all the saints and seers of the different philosophies and religions of India have come up with, basically. This is what they say are real signs of Advaita, of non-dual realization. Perfect vision is also listed in the Eightfold Path, for instance, of Lord Buddha, so you'll find it echoed in other systems. All of the little thought whirlpools into which the mind has broken declare one single aim, a vision and a search after the unity of being. So Swamiji is putting it in terms of us of this pool called a mind, Sara, this pool of essence, Sarada, you see. And basically it breaks into waves all the time. Different winds are blowing across it all the time. The wind of desire is one wind. The wind of aspiration is another wind. The physical wind blowing across the ocean is another wind on your sailboat. So there are different levels of Vayu, the god of wind, happening at different levels of your existence. And you need to connect them all. See, so you can gather. For instance, one of the greatest of all winds is the prana. They call that a wind blowing through your body. There are even songs and poems that are occurring to my mind right now about it. So it's this wind of prana that's blowing across the inner landscape. See? So you have to go and get a hold of that. Garuda, that great dragon bird, and ride those inner winds. Let them see where they take you. See? So that's this mind, this great mind that breaks into thought whirlpools and eddies. But they're all declaring one unity of being, he says. Everything is pointing toward that one ocean of consciousness. Nitya Mukti, absolute freedom. Freedom is the condition of growth. Take that off, the result is degeneration. So you can see how deeply Swamiji thinks about freedom. The one thing we need for growth. All the rest of that can put aside until we get that freedom. That's eternal, Nitya Mukti, freedom or emancipation. Triguna Titatvam is dissolution of the gunas. Now we talked about the obscuring power, the distorting power, and the revealing power, right? Let's go with the three gunas. So here they're saying at a very high level, those fitted for the Brahman state, you're going to have to transcend even the revelatory power. Revelatory power is useful for you for only a time. It'll get you into a sattvic and balanced state, but the problem with sattvic balanced state is you begin to enjoy it too much. Mm-hmm. And so you stay there in refined pleasures, subtle pleasures. Even pleasures of scriptures, you see, and things. Teachings, that's a kind of subtle barrier that one has to penetrate through eventually to get the real experience beyond the Dharma. The Swadharma, it's called. There's Adharma, we know the problems of that, people going against the way of righteousness. Then there's Dharma, you finally find the Dharma and its teachings. But there's a Swadharma too. Everything comes in threes that are good like that. So the Swadharma is that destiny, spiritual destiny that you are bound to reach. That's what you're looking for, is your Swadharma. Dharma is a good, in the meantime, Dharma is a good medium. So he says, the gunas keep the Jivatman in the body from joining the Paramatman. Paramatman with its 10 immutables and 6 complements, that will keep you from joining that Paramatman, and it'll keep you as the Jivatman. For instance, here you see right about there, the little parrot. I was deliberating, what can I assign to that parrot that she's holding in one of her hands on a flower? Oh yes, that's the Jivatman. That's the individualized soul. That's her pet. So we'll talk more about that later. But that Jivatman wants to get into union with the Atman, you see, in Brahman. It's like the bird on the lower branch that wants to fly up and join the bird on the upper branch. That's a famous story in the Upanishads. Finally, we have Brahmanishta, immersion in Brahman. he says, when I think I am Brahman, then I alone exist. It is so when I think so. So he's telling us sort of the original teaching on positive thinking comes out of the sannyasin of India. He stands at the head of the Vedas and he declares freedom above everything else. Nothing can bind him, not even God. Sri Ramakrishna used to say about the 16 disciples of Ramakrishna, they are my children. No one can harm them, not even God. That's the sannyasin. Is free from all concepts of God and is standing at the very head. So that absolute freedom, svatantriya, we call it as one of the complements of the Paramatman, and here he mentions it as a prerequisite to immersion in Brahman. So at the break, please think about these 7 levels of higher knowledge and see if you're fit for the Brahman state yet. And if not, how can you make yourself so? So here we'll take our break. Thank you. Om Sato Ma Satgamoya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamoya Mrichorma Amritam Gamaya Abira Bira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.
Kali Bol Mahadevi, Kali Bol Mahamaya, Kali Bol Mahashakti, Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Ramakrishna, 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 Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Mahadevi, Kali Bol Mahamaya, Kali Bol Mahashakti, Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Mahadevi, Kali Bol Mahamaya, Kali Bol Mahashakti, Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol.
Kali Bol Ramakrishna, Kali Bol.